with a great pleasure today that I introduce our guest speaker today, Magriet Villiers. She is an advisor in learning technologies at the Stellenbosch University Centre for Learning Technologies. And just a quick bit of background on Magriet. She has a keen interest in political philosophy and public theology. And she is currently doing her research on the work of Hannah Arendt's understanding of critical thinking and judgment through this lens. Her passion and her interest is especially in the pedagogy of discomfort, where learners are unique individuals who step in the world of higher education with embedded psychosocial structures and knowledge. So with this stance or this approach, it's the idea is that students need to gain the necessary skills to become well-rounded individuals and dynamic professionals. And for them to do so, the stance is that we need to instill a community of practice where students, educators, and broader structures work together to enable a holistic environment that these students can thrive in. So in today's webinar, Magriet will hone in on is the word I'm looking for, on academic integrity, specifically sharing her thoughts on COVID-19 and the continued discussion on academic integrity. Obviously also talking to the tool of Turnitin for academic integrity. So with this, I'd like to just switch over to Magriet.
Okay, good afternoon. I am just quickly making sure that I'm sharing the correct open tab with you. And then I would also just like to show my face to prove that I am not a robot, but indeed a real human being. So here I am. Hi, this is me. It's lovely to be here this afternoon. Hi, everyone. Thanks also for inviting me. I love this topic, and I've been working a lot with Eiffel course, so I always enjoy chatting to you and having these webinars. So thanks for having me. You know, we all have a bit of Zoom fatigue, so I can imagine that this isn't the first or the last Zoom webinar that we are all attending this week, but it's such an interesting topic to be a part of. And so I chose this theme, the more things change, the more they stay the same, which is an old adage. And I think it does apply in this case to the continuing discussion on academic integrity. Let me just make sure that my screen, there we go. So today I want us to talk about just where we are now and why we are here. So taking a bit of a look back at what we have experienced. And I think today is 154 days of the COVID pandemic in South Africa and lockdown. Then we'll also take a look at academic integrity and continue this discussion about why it is still very much a current topic. So why are we here and listening about this topic still? And how do we talk about it and why that matters? And I'm also going to take some time to just debunk some of the myths around the online environment and academic integrity, because there are quite a few that still persist. And it is because of this fear of these myths has been heightened due to where we are now and why we are here. And then lastly, we are going to talk about a new normal, and we'll get to what that means in a little while. So let's get started with where we are now and why we are here. And it's a bit of an existential question because no one saw COVID-19 really coming. And we are really, as I said, we've all been in numerous Zoom, Teams meetings, doing webinars. I think this is about the 24th webinar I've done in the last 153 days. And it's become such a part of our lives, working from home. And it's been coined that there's this term pandemic fatigue, which in effect just means that we are all really in the same boat. And I want us to know also that when I sit here on this side as the hostess or the speaker, you know, it sounds very glamorous perhaps, or authoritative, but I also come with this background of experiencing COVID-19 and the exhaustion that it brings, the absolute confusion that there still is about what's going to happen, when is it going to happen, what is our educational landscape going to look like in a month, never mind in the next year. Some frustration that we may have, or a lot of frustration, and then obviously all of us are quite stressed. And it, you know, this calling it pandemic fatigue is just something that I think comes with the territory of we are trying to juggle so many different things all at one time, and we have so little control about what is currently happening in our lives and in our work and with our families, and there's a lot to worry about. And this little quote, which Futurity, by the way, is a fantastic website, where they interviewed clinical psychologist Dr. David Sparra, who's a professor also at the University of Arizona in psychology. And he looks at social connectedness and health. And he says, well, this is basically just simply because we are being inundated with an enormous amount of pressures from different sides. And I think this is something that we can all relate to. We are worried and stressed about our work. We are worried and stressed about our kids. We are worried and stressed about schools, about our families that we cannot, visit. And I mean, I often get this. I am in my mid-30s. I am unmarried and have no children. So I often hear this, and I have stopped taking offense because I understand what people are trying to convey. Is that I have the time. So I am not a caregiver. I don't know what it's like dropping off the kids at school and having to rush at this time with that. Yet all of us, regardless of where we are and which context we are caregivers in some sense of the word. And I think at educators as well, there's this extra feeling of responsibility that we have as educators and caregivers to our students. So adding that extra element of stress also to our lives is really why we are once again sitting here discussing academic integrity, because this stress and this fatigue and all of these questions also come out of our shift that we've had to make in the recent months and weeks into the online environment. So I just want to say that the stress and fatigue that we've experienced, we know as educators, and we hear it from our students. Institutions hear it on a regular basis, that our students are experiencing the same thing. And the move to the online environment, this forceful move to work on an online environment that we might not be familiar with, whether it be an LMS that we've worked on for many, many years in a blended approach, whether it be MS Teams that schools have now had to introduce, or even WhatsApp. So where the line between work and home has been blurred, this is all highly stressful. And we are constantly as educators pulled by, the need of the institution and the student. And then, as an academic support staff member, such as myself, I often feel pulled by the institution, by lecturers and by the students, all in these different areas, because we are all looking for acceptable and safe ways of making it possible for our students to keep on learning, and not only learning, but flourishing in this time of this crisis. And this is the crux of the matter. We are in a crisis. This is not expected. We have had to suddenly move what we would generally approach from a face-to-face basis on an online space. So this is why we refer, and I specifically refer to emergency remote teaching, or ERT, because there's a great big difference between emergency remote teaching and online learning. And this is a fantastic article by Hodges and colleagues that was in the EduCourse review, saying we expect almost this from us, and maybe our institutions also expect it, and even if it's not said explicitly, we might feel this pressure of providing these exceptional online environments. So we were almost saying, we want the get smarter, future learn vibe, which is fantastic, but it's really unrealistic to transition suddenly from this face-to-face class to a wonderfully optimized online learning environment. And especially in a few weeks, I mean, that environment of online learning as we see it there takes time and effort, and the modules are created with that in mind. And that's not what we have been tasked to do at this time. And that's not what we are doing where we are now. What we are doing right now is trying to get our work on a space where students can access it reliably during this crisis. And in a sense that creates extra stress, but also lets us know, that we are not expected to have everything perfectly well done. And we cannot also measure online learning's efficacy accurately by comparing what we are experiencing now, which is ERT, to other online learning courses. And this is really important for us to remember in this time. So every time I try and when I find myself thinking, oh, I need to zhuzh this up a little bit, I think, wait, is this really necessary at this time and with what our students have at their disposal? And this adds to the stress, because although we are busy with emergency remote teaching, we are very much also aware that there is these instructional strategies and values for online learning, and how we create online spaces for learning, good practices so that our students really get the most out of their experiences. So emergency remote teaching isn't just a bare bones approach, it's also a way of rethinking now, okay, what have I created over the years in my modules and in my classes, and then rethinking about my delivery mode, the methods that I use to teach, what media do I use, and then creating it in such a way that it is addressing the rapidly changing needs of my students. It helps or addresses the limitations they might have to resources such as data or technology. And there's this nice table there. This is a study done in a Midwestern university by Watson, Bishop, Ferdinand, and James, where they went to master's students who had somewhere in their academic career done an online education course. And they said, well, only those students who did a course where the instruction material was 75% online, that was what they deemed was an online course. And they asked these students, and 624 students responded. And they said, in response to the question, what specific things would you like your online instructors to do to help you learn successfully? They mention these 10 things, from highest ranking to lowest. And we can see here that a lot of it centers around communication. A lot of it centers around relationality, community, and then, the sense of engagement and being in contact with a community of my peers, but also with my knowledge expert, my instructor. So while we say that we are being stressed, or we are stressed and being pushed into this world of emergency remote teaching, we also know that we are trying to do as much as we can online in as good an online fashion, so that the students get the best experience possible, even amidst this crisis. And then we keep on adjusting and adapting our environments to do so, also in response to what students are asking of us. So part of trying to do what we can at this time is also ensuring that we uphold academic integrity. And this is one of the things that has not changed. So we've spoken now about what has changed, and quite a lot has changed in a very short time. Yet one of the things that has not changed is the importance of academic integrity. So this has stayed the same, that this discussion, no matter where we are, no matter what we do, this plays an important part in our educational worlds. And I think one of the reasons why it remains such a current topic is because we are trying to equip our students to be individuals with a milieu of graduate attributes. And each of our institutions and our schools, even our country and different countries, we all have these different graduate attributes. I'm just sharing with you Stellenbosch's graduate attributes. But underlying all of this is we're trying to equip our students to be specific individuals. And we say we want them to be well-rounded individuals. We want them to be inquiring, so that they have critical thinking skills, that they are responsible wherever they go. We want people who are dynamic, problem solvers, in their professions. And then we also strive to create engaged citizens, so that our graduates, our students leave our environment with this skill set of contributing to their community. And academic integrity, in my opinion, underlines and underpins all of this, because graduate attributes and the academic integrity that underlines this It all remains current because it asks us to reflect on why we teach, how we teach, and also then, okay, what are students really learning in this process? So it helps to align our learning outcomes as educators. It helps us to review our institutional values and our goals and to see whether we are actually achieving them, and if not, why, and if yes, why as well. So learning from that in that process. And also talking about academic integrity and graduate attributes guides students to also understand what their roles are in this environment and what is expected of them in the learning environment in which they find themselves. So we write these graduate attributes down, and we write down and we talk about academic integrity because how we talk about our teaching and learning matters, and it will always matter as long as we are serious about education. And part of this continuing discussion is that it's really important to know how we then talk and articulate academic integrity and dishonesty then as well, and what we mean by it. So this importance of talking about it and making sure that we articulate what we mean by it takes place on two levels. And the first is that it's an institutional level. We need to be on the same page as to what academic integrity means in our contexts and environments and our institutions. So there needs to be this synchronicity, this holism, this constant discussion and dialogue between the lecturer and the student and the institution on academic integrity. And we also need to be aware that this is a theme, and the words we use and the way we talk about it needs to be continuously communicated. It's not something that this discussion will never ever end, as long as we take education seriously. So one of the questions that comes up is, so what is academic integrity? And that's really quite a multi-stranded and multifaceted topic. And it revolves around the relationship between assessments and plagiarism and the quality of our modules. It revolves around research integrity. And so it also looks at how are we instilling in higher education and in education in general to respecting and protecting the knowledge of ourselves, the knowledge we create ourselves, but then others' knowledge that we use as part of a community of research, and how we protect that through honesty, how we ensure that there's ethical policy and core values in the university. And then it's also important that we share these core values with the students so that they know what is expected of them. So I've just taken out, you all know what policies look like in institutions. So I've just taken out a really small sliver of this policy on research at the university, where it mentions specifically honesty and transparency. That are the two core values that they expect of students and of academics to uphold. So they also say, you know, to act ethically and in the best interests of the university at all times. Yet this is a lot of loaded terminology, because honesty and transparency, is very multifaceted. It means that we are assessing our students about work that they've actually done, and that whomever is assessing them is doing so, responsibly, is doing so with fairness and transparency. It's also about saying that if we want our students to act ethically and our staff to act ethically, then we also need to support them in being able to do so. So there's a fantastic article by Mpahlele and Makena. You'll see, I've put it in the bibliography, which we will share with you, where they look at Margaret Archer's analytical dualism. And she says that we must always look at the difference, this distinction between people and the parts. So in order to identify what is enabling and what is constraining within structures and cultures. And so when we look at these two quotes, honesty, transparency, two core values, obligated to act ethically, we need to ask ourselves, if this is part of this structure, then what is hindering us from doing this? Or what is enabling us from doing this? And I think part of it has to do with Margaret Archer's concept of, well, there's a culture, and culture is usually connected to the individual. So this relates to how we speak as individuals, whether we be lecturers or students, about our policies and about the words used in the policies. So we need to kind of look at, it's almost a constructivist perspective, important to then look at and understand how we as lecturers, educators, students perceive and relate to academic integrity and academic dishonesty. And so the first quote from Bruton and Childers on this slide illustrates that there is still a lot of confusion amongst individuals. So there's a confused culture, if we can put it that way, with regards to academic integrity. In this case, they mention specifically plagiarism. And this is with both lecturers and students, where it's very clear that there is, a general idea of what plagiarism or academic honesty and dishonesty may be, but people often differ even within the same department. And yet we're trying to uphold the same type of academic integrity if we all work within the same institution. And then, as the second quote states, once this confusion is there, it comes through and it filters through in many different ways. And one way is, for instance, in the way in which lecturers and educators speak to their learners and their students about academic integrity. So quite often students will say, well, my lecturer is aware that we are struggling to really do academic research, but there is no space within the syllabus or within the module for me to really practice this practice of research and proper academic research. So lecturers say they understand that the student needs to do this, yet they don't necessarily provide the environment to do so. And it also has to do with how institutions talk about policing plagiarism and expecting lecturers to be very strict about punishing, as such, their students who, do show signs of academic dishonesty. So the phrases we use and how we talk about academic integrity within this continuing discussion really absolutely matters, because we need to understand them all equally to know what we are referring to. And so we use phrases like plagiarism and cheating, and one of my favorite ones is technical parroting. Self-plagiarism in itself, we all know, and there's a lot of research done, and it's water cooler talk of what the hell is self-plagiarism? How can this really work? So what really comes to the fore, if we want to take academic integrity seriously as an institution and as individuals, then we need to consistently keep talking and understand the complex nature of academic integrity. And this should be shown in our documentation as institutions. This should be communicated to students. And we should also know that each of these different things that we all throw under academic integrity, or even under plagiarism, each of these aspects, and there are many other ways in which it can be phrased, need to be discussed and remedially approached uniquely. Because each one of these that we like to throw under the umbrella term academic integrity or plagiarism or cheating or dishonesty, each one of these will look different in a different context and needs to be approached, therefore, in that way. And in this way, we enable kind of structures and cultures that teach, that foster teaching over policing. And therefore, we foster critical discussion about what we mean when we say academic integrity, and how we can help and support students and staff to be academics with integrity over simple, uncritical punishment. So part of this talk of academic integrity and where we are now, and why we also are at this stage in where we are now so very interested in the topic of academic integrity is because we have lost a lot of control that we would usually have in our educational sectors and in our different institutions, because we are not doing our typical face-to-face environments or blended environments where we at least have some control through relationships and physical community with students. And along with this loss of self-control, we are trying to find different ways of gaining control in the online environments. And along with this comes some myths that we hold on to from pre-COVID, if I can put it that way. And we hold on to them because we are afraid that they may have an impact on the educational, our teaching and learning environment and the academic honesty and integrity of our different environments. But there are some myths that are walking around that research really does indicate is not necessarily true. Now, it sounds logical to say that students cheat more in online environments, and there have been several studies about cheating in the classroom. One of the sources in the bibliography, Watson and Sotile, they have a really fantastic overview and literature study of research done on cheating in the classroom. A lot of research has been done over the years of electronic devices, and we know that in this age of kind of copy and paste, where dishonest behavior is really a mouse click away, apparently, that obviously we are acutely aware that students have more access to tools that we, for instance, did not have when we were studying. Yet the research shows that it's not as simple as this. So although it sounds extremely logical, it's not quite so simple. So this literature by, I always struggle to pronounce the name, Grjalva, from 2006 is really very often cited in the literature, where they show that in their study, with only about 700 students, 3 to 4% of students admitted to cheating online. But here's the thing. They said that this was consistent with academic integrity violations or dishonesty in face-to-face courses. So in essence, cheating online or cheating face-to-face, if the opportunity is there and a student is under enough pressure and stress to do so, they will find a way. But it gets more intricate because when one looks at further research, it shows that, well, okay, Grjalva, once again here quoted, states that it was quite similar. The same amount of cheating took place online as well as in the face-to-face classroom. But in the same year, a study done by Lanier with almost double the amount of students, give or take, found that cheating in online courses was significantly higher. And then another study, 3 years later, in another area, said, well, students cheated less online. So what does this say? We don't know, we don't have all the information of how these online courses were set up, how were the assessments set up, what was the teaching environment like, what was the community of practice like. But what we can see from this research is that saying students cheat more in online environments, it's not as simple as that. And it really has a deeper, there needs to be a deeper discussion about if they are cheating, why? What are the constructivist elements? Perhaps it's stress, perhaps it's lack of a community of being able to ask questions because of the environment. So it's not as simple as saying that cheating takes place more online. It is also not fair to say that invigilation is the answer. So invigilation is also not foolproof. Now, I love this quote from Kath Ellis. So she's Associate Dean of Education at the University of New South Wales. And I love this quote because you can actually hear it. And those of you who, as myself, have sat in these exam rooms where you're kind of 3 seats away from the next person and there's a retiree walking around clickety-clackety, up and down and checking what you have in your hand, and if you have any contraband close to you, know that this is very true. We do think that because there's a physical presence of one human to another, that cheating in exam halls, or invigilation in exam halls or classrooms lessens the chance of cheating, but we know that that's not true. I mean, anecdotally as well, when we speak to each other in the coffee rooms and by the water cooler, we know that that is not true. Students have always cheated, and they've found really very creative ways to do so, where I sometimes think, well, please just give that person their diploma or certificate already, because if that's how creative they are, then they deserve it. And Kath Ellis says that she thinks if we look at it from a different perspective, we can see that moving online and in this time of having to do emergency remote teaching, perhaps it gives us access to information that we might not have had before because it's online, and see the behaviors that they are using in this online environment and that they are showing in this online environment. So this myth that invigilation in person works is not, always true. And in fact, the only way that they found invigilation to be actually foolproof, if it was one invigilator to one student, so a 1-to-1 ratio, which we know does not happen. And then we often get the communication that, well, let's create a policy, or let's create another policy, or let's expand on our policy, and that will help. And yes, policies are extremely important. Policies protect our institutions, policies protect our students, they protect the lecturers, and they can be a fantastic way to also ensure that there is quality in our institutions. But by saying policies are the answer, or let's add another policy, this is quite an oversimplification. Because the fact is that policies try to encapsulate often very complex themes and topics. For instance, academic integrity and dishonesty and plagiarism. And what happens is, in trying to find a way to verbalize that and to write it down in a constructive document, it often makes a very intricate topic seem simpler than it is. And once again, Mphahlele and McKenna, this is a fantastic article from our own South African environment, rightly states that these policies make plagiarism, and I want to say academic honesty and integrity, almost seem very simple. And we know that it is not. And it comes back again to what we started with by saying it's because how we phrase things matter, and how we communicate what we mean by those phrases and the words and the word choice matters. So if this is an oversimplification, what should we focus on? Well, rather the focus should then be on clearly communicating the policies and guidelines, not simply just creating new ones or disseminating the old ones and thinking, okay, well, I've shared it now with my students, or I've shared it now with my staff, and this is enough. No, we need to clearly communicate the policies and guidelines available, and also clearly communicate what they are trying to achieve. So discussing the policies, discussing the terminology and the expectations that we have for staff and students. And we need to do it, and here's a key word, repeatedly, continuing the discussion, because we need to make sure that this is embedded within our institutional values, that it's embedded within ourselves as educators, and that it becomes embedded within our students as graduates. So just handing out this policy or just simply having it is not enough. We need to discuss as institutions, but then also as lecturer to student or educator to student, we need to communicate very, very clearly. And then we should focus also on how can we support students whom we see might be struggling with academic practice. So we often see that, and it comes back again to this confusion we create with policies. We have these fantastic policies, yet we talk about it and we are not all on the same page about what it means. We know we are supposed to, punish anyone who has committed plagiarism or seems to have had, dishonest practices. But in our policies and in our thinking and our talking and our discussions, we also need to leave space for remediation, where we help and support and have things in place that help and support students and even academics who really do struggle still with research integrity, to really grapple with the academic practice and learn the skills necessary. And this is how we maintain and uphold and create an environment of academic integrity in our spaces. And then one of the aspects that we should also be focusing on policies, and part of the discussion, is on clearly communicating how we use text matching software. So how do we use it? Is there training available? And we need to ensure that that training is clearly stipulated, that support in that case is also given, so that people know how to use the software to the best of its abilities. Because another myth is that having plagiarism detection software is enough. So when we say plagiarism detection software, that's a bit of a misnomer, because something like Turnitin is in effect text matching software. The plagiarism detection comes in where the human, the lecturer, the expert, even a moderator, is the one who goes and reviews that report that comes from the text matching software such as Turnitin. We know that there are some pitfalls in the way in which something like Turnitin processes information, and simply taking the similarity report and the similarity score as the final word of plagiarism is really irresponsible, because it is simply a tool. And it's not a plagiarism detector in itself. The person who detects the plagiarism is the person who looks at the file and who uses that report responsibly to see what has it picked up and why. So McKenna and Pahlele also mentioned Weber-Wolf, and if you are interested in the use of text matching software, so I want to move away from the word plagiarism detection software, text matching software, she really has fantastic work written about it. There's a book that's come out, it's an ebook, False Feathers, which is also very useful to read. And she says, you know, if you don't go through the report with a critical eye, then in effect the tool is useless, because it does not give you the full reality of the student's work and the full truth of the student's work. It needs to be a call that is made by a person, not by an algorithm. So we use this the software because it has really a pedagogical advantage. And if we look at it as a pedagogical tool, and I've been saying this for many years, and yet it's always when someone else verbalizes it, you think, yes, that's what I've been trying to say the whole time. And that's how I feel about this article. Because as Mpahlele and McKenna with their studies have found that these tools and these software, the software is really most effective when it's a pedagogical tool rather than a policing tool. Because in that way it helps and shows students what their writing practice is lacking and what their research practice perhaps might be lacking. But then it needs this discussion. It needs the relationality of someone sitting with you and going with you through it, or having someone to ask about the reports and why it has picked up what it has picked up. So just saying, well, we have the software in our institution, it's enough. It will stop academic dishonesty. That is, in essence, really not true. So let's talk about a new normal. What does all of this therefore mean in the new normal? Why should we be taking this discussion and what we've learned through, as I call it, pandemic pedagogy or education that has taken place, or teaching and learning that has taken place during a time of crisis, and the discussion about academic integrity seriously in the future. And I specifically don't want to say post-COVID here, because I think post is, I feel about it as I feel about the term post-apartheid. That is different for different people and for different contexts and for different institutions. So I would rather refer to the new normal that we are going into as educators in our fields. And this discussion about academic integrity is definitely going to be part of our new normal, because we are serious about what we do. That is why we're here as educators. But we can learn a lot from the pandemic, and through looking at what we have heard and seen during the pandemic regarding academic integrity. So when we started this discussion, I started off by saying, the pandemic has not deterred the continuing discussion on academic integrity, so nothing much has changed. Yet, I think what the pandemic has changed, or at least I hope it has, is that it's to push us harder to think about how we will address our teaching and learning, and with that, academic integrity in the new normal that is to come. So I saw this article, it's from the World Economic Forum. And with the title, I immediately thought they were going to say, well, everything's going to go online from now on. Every institution is going to be a fully online institution. And I was very hesitant. I was actually quite angry from the start, because we all know that in different contexts, that is just not the case, and we would not necessarily want that. But the article had this fantastic, and it didn't say that, by the way, and it has this fantastic paragraph where it says, COVID-19 has really changed education.
COVID-19 has changed.
Can you please mute your mic? Thank you so much. So COVID-19 has really changed education because it has forced us and pushed us to really think about our teaching and learning approaches. And they mention here Yuval Noah Harari's work that says, well, rote learning, this type of regurgitation, sitting in an exam hall, just spewing what you've been studying or cramming. Also this idea that read, watch, listen acquisition is the way in which we should optimally teach. The pandemic has shown us that this is not necessarily true, and that we can and should rethink the way in which we teach, even if we were to come back to a fully face-to-face environment. So it pushes us to think how we can better our approach to teaching and learning, how we can expand on that to also help us revise our roles as educators. Are we the sage on the stage, or are we the guide on the side? And then also helps us to rethink how can we adapt our general approaches, such as assessments? Because learning from the pandemic, we have heard a lot about assessments, and of course, academic integrity is not only about assessments, but that is where we often focus our attention when it comes to the theme. But what we have learned from the pandemic is that, we are capable of teaching, and students are capable of learning on a different platform than we might have thought we could before this all started. I think we were all quite hesitant about going online and doing emergency remote teaching, but we've realized we can do this. And students were also quite nervous about, could they do these new types of assessments? Would they be able to actually pass their grade, their modules? And this is in Afrikaans. It was in die Burger. So die Burger has a student, open ed or opinion piece section where students from universities across South Africa can send in their ideas around contextual issues. And this was written by a student at Stellenbosch University, Mariki Boyens. And this quote that I've just taken out of the rest of it, but if you can, please go and read it. It's really quite interesting to hear the perspective, is that she notices that lecturers had to think out of the box to adjust to online learning. And she doubts highly whether students will be happy to climb back into the old box, the pre-pandemic box, when everyone comes back or settles into the new normal of campus. I've also had a discussion with a student, or heard about a discussion where a student said, she was initially exceptionally scared about writing an online assessment that asked her to analyze a piece of work, because she thought, how is she going to do that? She studies to regurgitate. She doesn't study to analyze. And after the semester, the student came back to the lecturer and said she can't imagine going back to an exam hall, and with that type of exam question that goes along with our typical face-to-face environments. Because what she has learned is that she can learn in a different way, and that she's really learned how to think about her material and her learning and the knowledge field and discipline in which she is from a very different perspective. And that makes me really happy. It's nice to see that students have found a way to learn during this time, that they've flourished. Of course, we hope that this is for all, but we know that that might not be true. And students really appreciate the effort that lecturers have put in into rethinking their work and providing a different perspective to their discipline and their field. And that's something that we need to take with us from the pandemic and from moving to emergency remote teaching. So learning from it is to rethink how we design. So Jones and Sheridan says, design out your plagiarism. So we've had to, through the pandemic, through looking at how we assessed, how we set up materials in the emergency remote teaching and learning environments, how could we do that with what we had? And what a lot of lecturers and educators have done is personalize tasks so that, you know, it's very difficult to be dishonest if it's about your personal experience or data or information that, you know, they did in a previous phase of work. Change assessment tasks for different groups, even in one cohort, or restrict them to a much smaller group of resources so that they know it's futile to plagiarize. They'll have to cite and they'll have to dig deeper and analyze. Create something, like for instance, one of the lecturers here at engineering, she says she asks them to, instead of giving them a lab protocol, she works with them through a lab protocol, and then later on their assessment is to create that protocol themselves. She gives them the formula and the solution, and she says, okay, well, create the protocol to get to there. And in that way, you know, it takes a lot of analysis, synthesis, and just critical thinking skills, which is higher order Bloom's thinking. And then also, of course, providing formative spaces for students to actively learn these skills could be really, really helpful in making sure that they have the skills to be good academics and have the graduate attributes that we hope that we instill in them. So the crux of the matter is that through the lens of the pandemic and emergency remote teaching, and through our experience, we see that it really centers around this relational, holistic approach. So the institution, its policies, the lecturers, the students, and the technology, as we see here, Turnitin's logo, all needs to work together because it needs to create this environment of shared responsibility for academic integrity. So this is shared, it's shared by the students, it's shared by the institution, it's shared by the technology, it's shared by the lecturer. And there is no quick fix. There is no magic bullet. If there was, we would not be having this webinar and this discussion. But if we keep this discussion going and we learn from our research, we learn from our experience, and we learn from the pandemic moving into a new normal and what that might look like, we find that by working towards this enabling environment, so it's about enabling and providing the space for growth, promotes academic integrity, and that helps rather than punishing academic dishonesty. So I think although some things change and some things still stay the same, I think some things may change after this if we keep this discussion going and keep rethinking from our ERT lens, that it will really change for the better and will help us revise our teaching and learning environments and our approaches. And it will be for the better in our new normal, and our students, as well as ourselves as educators, will really get a lot of value from this. Thanks so much. Jolene, are you with me?
Yes, I'm here. Just like to see,
Okay,
see if anyone, sorry, I unmuted myself, but it somehow didn't do it properly. Just wanted to see if there's anyone that has any questions. Otherwise, there's a question or two that I can ask. If anyone wanted to quickly ask a question, you're welcome to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. Otherwise, I'm going to quickly, let me just rather stop sharing my screen. Sorry, that's not working nicely. Okay, so I think there was one question on the side that maybe I just wanted to also ask. We had the question in terms of whether the method of cheating does not differ between online and face-to-face modalities. Is that not evidence, or is there evidence on that? I would say now.
That's a very good question. I see it's from Barry. So Barry, that's an extremely good question, and it's part of a lot of research. And it's shared in the bibliography of this webinar, or of this presentation. But there is proof, and it's in the article by Watson and Setole, where they specifically say, you know, the only place where cheating was found to be more prevalent in the online environment was through collusion. So yes, students are finding a way of colluding through the online environment, and in that way cheating. So yes, in fact, it is a bit different. Obviously, collusion could also take place in person, but that's why the importance is that collusion must then be minimized through the way in which we approach our assessments and set up our assessments. And also, then we also must be very clear when talking to our students what we mean by not working together and not colluding. Because a lot of them do think that, it's okay, you know, because, you know, we're all working towards the same goal here. And so there is, I would suggest for evidence to go and read Watson and Setole's article, because that was the only space where they saw a huge difference, was with collusion online. And therefore a personalized or formative assessment might be of help. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Thanks, Mariki. Yes, that did in part, and it is Barry speaking. From personal perspective, one of the things I've seen is you talk about collusion. I've sat with a group of students doing a quiz for a reputable South African university, and all that was happening was a whirlwind of WhatsApp communication.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know, the other take that I'd like to add something to, and you know, it really becomes quite a risky topic to bring up. But early in your dialogue, you talked about culture. And you know, I've taught across many cultures in South Africa, and it's interesting that you know, I think that what we see there is that what people have different reflections on dishonesty and different reflections on what they want out of a course. You know, I've taught many students who quite blatantly come in and all they really want is the certificate at the end.
Yeah.
And how you get there is irrelevant.
Doesn't matter. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so, you know, we can talk nicely about trying to instill good thought and right process into the students, as we should. But, yeah, I'm not entirely sure how we're going to overcome that other side of inappropriate behaviour without heavy policing. I don't know, I think I'm talking in riddles now, but so I
It makes absolute sense. And that is why policies are important. So when I said debunking the myth that policies are the answer, you know, we also, you know, I said that policies are important in this case, so that when we do, we won't be able to overcome that, whether we are face-to-face or online. I mean, if that student is determined to do the least amount of work simply for their certificates or the completion, then they will do that regardless. And then it is important that in our policies, we also communicate very clearly, and also as lecturers to students, the implications of what will happen if it is clearly found that in a process that we go through that you did commit a sense of, or you did commit plagiarism or was academically dishonest. And then that person needs to be taken, you know, it has to be held responsible for that. And I don't think we can ever overcome all of this. I mean, it's human nature, a lot of this. But we can try and instill it as well as possible. I think of it a little bit as parenting. You know, we try our best to instill the values in a communal, relational way, and through community of practice and teaching our kids at home. And yet sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But we do hope that it would work with most students. And research has found that at least having open discussions between lecturers and students in modules about what they mean when they say academic dishonesty and plagiarism, and what it is and what it would look like and what it should not look like, has made a difference. And lastly, about the WhatsApp thing, that is something that's been coming up a lot. And I mean, we expected this, but I don't think we expected so much of this collusion in that sense. So one of the things we found at Stellenbosch to work was we've set up very strict times for quizzes. And we have set up different quizzes for different groups within the same cohort. So that for them, and it was very strictly timed, they were told weeks in advance that this was going to happen. They had to have, you know, a way of getting online and doing this quiz. And it was set up in such a way that they didn't physically have the time to WhatsApp each other. And let me tell you, the students struggled their behinds off to actually finish that quiz or that assessment, because they were really relying on being able to collude, and they couldn't. And then a lot of them came back afterwards and said, well, I must be honest. I didn't study because I thought I was going to be able to do kind of an open book approach. So rethinking once again how that assessment is done might be helpful. And perhaps once again, in lessening the, how do I put this? We also want to lessen this pressure for some of these assessments where it forces students, and through the stress and pressure, they feel they have no other way than to collude or be dishonest. And we've also found that through formative assessments and doing kind of quizzes like that on a regular basis, when it came to the summative quiz, collusion was much less. No, I don't have evidence for that as such, because I mean, in ERT, we are only now getting the breathing space to look back and go, oh, you know, this is what happened. But that was quite an interesting observation. And maybe it would be interesting if you could get back to me and say, well, maybe you tried something and it worked or it didn't work. I think this is where this community of discussion needs to keep going. Yeah.
Can I add an interesting, and I don't want to hog the time here, there are many other participants, could I add an interesting addendum to
Sure.
the quandary of specifically timed tests and quizzes? Yeah. You know, I'm teaching in an institution which at the moment our students are widely spread and mostly located in rural areas. And I think that you know, when we're teaching in the major centres and access to unlimited internet and to strong internet access is good, fine. But you know, we're battling to keep our learners logged in on a constant basis. You know, they're lucky if they can log into a test to start with. In a double lecture slot, we've got students that are logging in and out 13 times. And of course, in these structured timed tests, you know, you log out once and you're in trouble. Yeah. So yeah, it's a quandary in the context that we find ourselves in South Africa at the moment, and the massive disparity between what's available for students at different parts of the country. Exactly. It's, enough there.
And no, but definitely, and I think all of us sitting here experience a lot of that. I mean, it is, that's one of the most heartbreaking things for me during this pandemic, was not being able to actively, physically help my students as I would have when they were here, even if it was, you know, financially or with extra support, whatever that was, because it's a different environment now. And we are very, and for that reason, we are very careful to say that we don't condone synchronous classes because not everyone can get there. But through surveys and reaching out to students via lecturers and tutors, in a certain way, we found ways to minimize a lot of that. But this is where it comes back to why I was so worried about that article from the World Economic Forum, when they said this is how the pandemic changed education. And I thought they were going to say, we're all going to go online now. And I thought that would be disastrous for our context, because I don't think that is physically viable. I don't necessarily think it's a good idea, and it's not physically viable for our environment. And so it is a quandary, and it's really difficult. And that's what makes this emergency remote teaching is we try and do the best we can, and try and find creative ways about getting those students who are struggling, either through technology or financially, to get them support, whether that means to bring them back now as the first 33% to come back to university. You know, that's all part of those discussions. And that makes it all very, very intricate. I want to, if it's okay, I want to mention what Wynand said about similarity. Absolutely. We need to move away from saying that it's plagiarism reports and saying it's all about similarity and what text it's picking up from other people's work and why, you know, thinking about that and why it is that we say similarity and not plagiarism. And then I would like to, if it's okay, Jolene, I saw the question I raised about, is there no option of online invigilation through using personalized camera? So proctoring software. Yes, well, proctoring software is something that a lot of people are speaking of as options for their environments. Respondus is definitely one of them now, as Abram's put there. And we as an institution have looked into it as well. And some environments felt that for their context and their need, it was feasible. But software proctoring as such, proctoring software as such is not necessarily applicable for all environments. So it's something that you need to constructively discuss, the pros and the cons of what you are trying to achieve with proctoring software, and whether that is then the best course of action and is usable by your students. So will it be, basically asking, will it be viable for your environment? Because it is not necessarily in all contexts. And then what that basically means is to ask is why you want to use that specific proctoring software. Could you perhaps also look at changing up your assessment approach? And that's where we revise, once again, teaching and learning and how we do that. And it comes down to restructuring our assessments. So absolutely, Respondus has been used by our institution as well in the past with good feedback. But in certain contexts, that was just not feasible. So that's a very good question that a lot of people are asking. And I think the response will differ from context to context.
Okay, thanks, Magriet. I think there were a few questions I had, but quite a lot of what you spoke about was kind of, and asked was covered in what you spoke about now, especially. I think one of the things I wanted to add is exactly that of the mindset or the train of thought that students normally have when it comes to assessments and assignments, and how old the ways are that we invigilate or assess in general, in school and at university. And, you know, rethinking that would also, you know, long-term help with the approach to how students approach these things. And hopefully also address that integrity. If the things we assess in a student and what they know and understand, that it's not, you know, just that parrot repetition or very straightforward answers. I think that will obviously also play a role. So I think this whole process has also made everyone rethink the way we do things in general. Yeah, so I mean, the only other thing maybe is to look at is if they do online assessments, do you kind of notice that their marks differ from like previous, if you know your students' records well, and you notice on an online exam or an assessment that their marks jump, is that something that you can monitor or notice?
Yeah, so that is often a question that comes up a lot as well, is people saying, and it comes down to collusion, saying that because they can collude, their marks will go up. And we have, in fact, seen some of that happening in modules. And then when you go back to the assessment itself, and I like what you said, Jolene, about the way in which we assess, and what you also said to Sitsope, it has to do with changing the approach to assignments and assessments. So rethinking the way it is designed. And if you do see a jump in your students' grades for no apparent reason, it also begs the question to ask, but how am I assessing? So perhaps if I'm still using, a very straightforward yes, no, MCQ approach, MCQs have their place, by the way, but if I am seeing that, or I am expecting of students to give me very clear cut, let's call them exam room answers, yes, it may be that your students' grades will jump, and it's not necessarily due to collusion or due to cheating. It could also be the way in which we're thinking about the questions we are asking them. And then it's very helpful to just sit with a colleague and say, okay, well, how do you think I can, get a bit more of higher order Bloom's thinking from my students? How can I change my questions? Not only because we don't want them, it's not because we don't want them to get higher grades, but we want them to actively engage with the work and therefore get good grades, not simply get it, as Barry said, because they want to complete their module. So yeah, I think what you said definitely speaks to that.
Thanks, Magriet. I think we've pretty much run out of time, but I can add, if there are any questions, please feel free to email us on the marketing email address, and we can always forward it to Magriet, and we can also assist. We have a team of a services team that also has a lot of experience in online teaching and learning, we offer various services to help with that too. And obviously, in terms of academic integrity, working with Turnitin, there are various sources that we can help. I think that's the biggest thing during this time, is we need, as an EdTech or an education community, higher education community, we need to all work together to make the most of our circumstances and get through these changes and get through it efficiently for the sake of everyone involved, students and lecturers, and the communities involved. So thanks.
And if I may also
much.
say,
Yes,
no problem, but just say, Jolene, you're welcome to give my information to colleagues who'd like to contact me. I see, for instance,
great.
Mercy, I can imagine that it must have been a hell of a time for you guys, really thinking for the first time about refining your teaching and learning at this time. And it would also be very interesting, for instance, Barry, to hear how one could think together a bit about the assessment and the colluding and that question. And in this way, if you would like to reach out to me, it would be fantastic to keep this community alive.
Definitely.
So
I will add your email address and details to the when we send out the recording and the link, so that everyone has it together. And then I agree with you. I think that's during these times, it's the best way to approach this, is to put all our knowledge and resources together. Obviously, it's for the greater good of everyone. So, so thanks so much for your time, Magriet. It really was insightful. We're always so grateful to work with you on presentations and events, and I'm looking forward to our next one pretty soon.
Absolutely.